I haven't seen my class, my EPIC class, in weeks. And so what I want to say to you guys is I miss you. A lot of your hair has gotten longer. Mine has gotten shorter. And I just want to impart a little bit of news. Some of you know it already, but Ezra Barzilay has just been awarded the Tufts University highest award for an alumnus. He will be the Light on the Hill Award winner this year. Guys, Ezra Barzilay is the lead epidemiologist for the Centers for Disease Control and very deeply involved in their global health reconstruction efforts in Haiti, Rwanda, and elsewhere. And without whom none of this could have occasioned itself. He educated us. We're hoping that you feel as though we've helped educate you. There's much going on in our lives. The students that you are going to be mentored by and who you are going to meet in some cases for the first time are very distinguished in our university. Things are happening to them, remarkable awards, and we'll try to give you a profile of them and hope that you make friends here. And in large measure, this enterprise is an intellectual enterprise, but it's also a community building exercise. And we're very hopeful that you will appreciate what Tufts is, appreciate what a university education can mean to you, and we're just very proud that you're here, and very, very thankful that so many veterans are here, so many wonderful teachers have come back. Monica, how many years did you say it's been?
Since 1993.
1993. Stunning. And it was Monica who understood my sensibilities, although I was taken aback, because this is a very bittersweet moment. I'm going to ask all of you, please, to look at the back of your programs. There actually is a person smiling, a young man, at that point, a younger man, who's no longer with us, Hunter Farnham. And as Heather said, he was very important to this program as a mentor, as a teacher, a member of our executive board. And we are memorializing him with the initial Hunter Farnham keynote to this important program, Inquiry, because this is a program that he loved. He loved teaching, he loved youth, and he's been taken from us. I met Hunter in 1960-61 when I was a freshman. He was a senior at Johns Hopkins University, so you can do the math. But the bottom line is that this is a person who really was so generous of spirit, so strong of intellect, and so wonderful a friend that I hope all of you have friendships like this and recognize. If you look at his biography, and I ask you to spend a few minutes at some point during the weekend to absorb what this guy had to do and what he was able to accomplish in his life. And one of the most proud things he did was change USAID's policy on food, recognizing that food was used as a weapon in the Horn of Africa in the battles between Eritrea and Ethiopia. Stunning man, a wonderful tennis partner, somebody who's beloved by so many people, and I just want to acknowledge his presence. You will meet the folks who are coming from Phillips Exeter tomorrow and meet his wife, his wonderful wife who is escorting the delegation and carrying on that legacy. And I just want to acknowledge this moment. And in this regard, I'm ecstatic that a friend, a colleague, Saul Tzipori, has agreed to take the initial lecture in Hunter's name, so this has particular significance for me. And to bring up Alex to introduce Saul. Alex is a freshman here. She's a distinguished student in the EPIC colloquium, but her, I think, most distinguished reality is that she beat me in 7 consecutive saber bouts a couple of weeks ago. So with great embarrassment and great respect for you, Alex, come on up here and do the honors.
Hi
Hi guys, my name is Alex Bowden, and Sherman, in your defense, you were the first person to ever successfully flunge at me. So,
first person to ever
successfully flunge at me and get a point. So, okay. Alright.
Not bad for a 7-year-old.
Not at all. Alright, a couple things about me. I'm a freshman here, as Sherman said, and I intend to major in biology and anthropology and pursue a career in medicine after Tufts. I'm especially interested in zoonotic disease and how they interact with culture. But our speaker tonight, Saul Tzipori, has gone far beyond what many professionals have seen in this field. Over the last half-century, over 70% of emerging infectious diseases, such as AIDS, SARS, avian flu, West Nile virus, and Lyme disease, have originated in animals. The study of zoonosis, or the spillover of animal diseases into human populations, is a growing field, and many experts have posited that the next big one, or the next great global pandemic, is likely to be of zoonotic origin. Over the last 30 years, Dr. Saul Tzipori has helped pioneer the field of comparative medicine and infectious disease. As a professor of microbiology and infectious disease at the Tufts Cummings School of Veterinary Medicine, Dr. Tzipori is using his veterinary skills to understand human diseases and lead Tufts' single largest research entity in an effort to improve public health in the United States and abroad. Today, he leads over a dozen faculty researchers and more than 50 staff and graduate students in critical research areas. Though they are based at the veterinary school, Dr. Tzipori and his team focus exclusively on infectious diseases in humans by studying these diseases in animals. And these diseases are either identical to human diseases or can serve as models for a study. This group is currently participating in a program funded by the Gates Foundation Grand Challenges to develop vaccines against childhood diseases in developing countries, helping us prepare ourselves and learn as much as we can before the next outbreak. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to present Dr. Saul Tzipori. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's quite a challenge for me. Not the usual demographic audience that I speak to, so I had to kind of rethink how to address topics such as this, which can be very complex at the same time. It's easy to follow, to make it interesting. So I put it together, and I hope you will learn something at the end. Hopefully none of you have any tomatoes with you, but at the end of it you'll come to show stuff with you. It's not exactly what you're expecting. Thank you so much for sometime when people describe my accomplishment, I don't recognize myself, is somewhat effusive. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about pandemics, public health, and disease transmission. But I'm also going to put it in the context of other serious diseases that are global in nature and not necessarily transmissible. Because I think it's very important not to lose focus, especially with audience like yourself, who in your future are likely to be moving in areas other than infectious disease, zoonotic disease, pandemic diseases, and so on. So there is a lot. Just to introduce you to our, this is our laboratory. Our department resides in. It looks beautiful in the summer, but nothing like that right now. We occupy the second floor of the second building. But I wanted to say a few words about this particular building, of which we are particularly proud of. It's an RBL, the New England Regional Biocontainment Laboratory, which was built by NIH to help scientists like ourselves to conduct research in a very safe environment, because we handle their dangerous pathogens, what we call BSL-3, which means that they are dangerous to work on the bench in an open space. They are also, we work there with select agents, what we call select agent, meaning those that have potential for becoming biothreats. And our task is to develop countermeasures against some of those infectious agents, which can be very risky and may be used by bioterrorists. In particular, we focus on something like botulinum, which is one of the nastiest known toxin in nature. It's been very challenging, and we're making progress, I'm glad to say. But we also work with anthrax and Yersinia pestis, tuberculosis, and so on. In addition to some of the other mundane infectious agents that infect us on a daily or weekly or yearly basis. So this is another view of it, New England Regional Biocontainment Lab. And the National Institute of Health built 12 of those, and we were fortunate to compete and have one built at Tufts. So what's global health? And here is a definition for you. You can read it yourself, I can read it for you. But in the end, it's an area for study, research, and practice that places a priority on improving health and achieving equity in health for all people worldwide. Global health emphasizes transitional health issues, determinants, and solutions. Involves many disciplines within and beyond the health sciences, as you would imagine, and promotes interdisciplinary collaboration. It has to be collaboration amongst all the various disciplines to accomplish any task that involve either treating or preventing infectious diseases. And it is a synthesis of population-based prevention with individual-level clinical care. So here are some of the, again, some kind of more like definitions more than anything else. When we speak about global health, we really don't specifically refer to a particular location. It's more in terms of global scope. For instance, climate change. Climate change is not something that occurs in one geography compared with another. The impact may be felt in one geography more prominently than in others, but the climatic change is occurring globally. Epidemic infectious diseases, avian influenza is an example, and I'll come back to this again, because we keep talking about avian influenza as the major yet to occur pandemic, and yet it hasn't happened yet. It was described for the first time in 1997, and we all got very nervous thinking that this is really the coming, because it's a very virulent influenza, meaning that it has attributes which can kill people very readily at a short time, and we didn't have the tools to control it at the time. But what hasn't happened yet is that for a pandemic to take off and spread from human to human, it has to go from animal to humans, and then from humans to humans. And from human to human hasn't happened yet, at least not in any scale that would pose a threat. Nevertheless, we've been working, when I say we, the scientific community, I don't work with influenza. We've been working with this, trying to find as much information about the virus, the structure, the habitat, and so on. In fact, there were 2 laboratories which you may have heard in the news about a year ago that were able to actually synthesize in the lab the kind of viruses that would lead to pandemic. That has not happened in nature yet, but they were able to synthesize them in the lab. And there was some controversy about publication of these viruses in the scientific literature. There was also debate about it at NIH and in Congress. And that's really an interesting issue, because we are taught to do science and publish it for the benefit of mankind, for the benefit of scientists to be able to learn from each other and move the boundaries further. And here, for the first time, there was a request by governments and foundations and agencies not to publish work that was actually funded by government agencies. So there was quite a controversy about this. And that's really originates from the fact that although we always speak about pandemic and we bring avian influenza as an example, it really hasn't happened yet. But luckily enough, that gave us a chance to learn as much as we could about the virus, about the transmission, about the likely spread. We have stockpiles of vaccines in key areas, particularly in hospitals, and available to immunize and treat people who are in the healthcare professions. There were just 2 days ago in the news that 2 people in China died from avian flu. They contracted that from animals. So it's a major issue, and it's a good example how to go about to prepare for preventing pandemics in the future. Another example which did not work as well was the SARS. If you remember, this was in 2005 or 6. SARS managed to get all the way to Canada before it was stopped, and so that was kind of successful, yes, but it could have been prevented earlier on, and that in itself was a very important lesson for us to learn. So then other zoonotic, non-infectious agents, tobacco control, air and water pollution, obesity, malnutrition, and nutrition. Nutrition is important. I'll show you in the next slide. And of course, you could add any other concept that you could think of, and it'll be just as correct. So here we have an example of gender issues. This is the cultural factors, and we know that in some countries it's very important. These are twins, and you could see the size of the boy, and you could see the size of the girl, and you could guess who got most of the food. And it's a sad reality, and we society need to really find ways to combat a situation like this. But being cultural, it makes it very difficult to break the barriers between cultures. But that's not to say that we shouldn't try. These are examples of major causes of death in children. Some of the aspect of my presentation may be depressing for you, but you know, it is what it is. And we created some of this for you, and you are the next generation, and we're hoping you'll really get on with fixing this for us, and for your own children and for the future. So there's a lot of work to do, and that's one of the points I want to stress, that we spent many years in working in scientific research, generating a great deal of information. There is an explosion of scientific information that were generated in the last 30 years. But there's still a major gap between the amount of knowledge that we have in relation to in relation to infectious diseases and infectious agents, and really coming up with solutions. So there is this huge gap that we're going to have to pass it to the next generation to really exploit the scientific research that's being generated as we speak, and exploit it in a way that what we call translational research. That means take that knowledge and make use of it in terms of protecting, treating, and defending societies from the scourges of diseases. And of course, infectious diseases is one aspect of others which can be precipitated by poor nutrition, and I'll speak to this in a minute. And this slide basically shows, the major causes of children are malnutrition and infectious disease. And you can look down the bottom, it lists the percentage of kids in a population that are affected with any of those malnutrition, respiratory, anemia, measles, fever, and other causes. And here is another way of looking at the various global distribution of disease burden attributable to 20 selected risk factors. Underweight is way out there, and as you can see, unsafe sex, high blood pressure, tobacco, alcohol, and again, the list is there. Zinc deficiency is another one which is very common in third world countries. Lead poisoning is very common in villages that depend on water, bore water, which is available in different villages. This is very true in Southeast Asia, and lead poisoning is very important. Okay, so here is another kind of depressing slide, and hopefully, and I'm not sure, we're moving, unfortunately, in a very slow motion to combat the problem of pollution. The projected premature annual death due to urban air pollution, you could see for yourself here. In developed countries, it's about 20. In former socialist economies, which is a nice way of putting it, it's 200. And then if you look down and you see what might happen between 2001 and 2020, it's on an accelerated rate. I think slowly some communities started to do something about it, but the road is long, and as you can see, we're running out of time. So this is kind of one of the vicious cycles that really we're familiar with regard to infectious diseases. Malnutrition is a major contributor, because with malnutrition it impacts immunology, the immune response, it impacts the ability of the body to respond to diseases, and as a consequence, an infection which would be normally transient or acute, lasting 3 to 5 days, it ends up lasting for weeks. The impact, especially the younger the children are, the longer the disease is, especially if you're associated with severe malnutrition, but it also leads to cognitive impairment, which lasts for years, and it leads to stunted growth. So it's a major issue that even when they do recover the infection finally, they will have a very tough course ahead of them for the rest of their lives. So this is the kind of what we call the vicious cycle. Dietary insufficiency, malnutrition, infection, environmental factors that come into it, and there are many reasons for dietary insufficiency. All you need is a couple of trace elements which are very important, like zinc and vitamin A, and all the nutrition in the world is not going to help these children that are deficient in those two basic elements. So this is what it looks like, and what it might look even more or worse in the near future or in the far future. The North Pole, and you can see what happens when we talk about climatic change. While here we are less affected, but really globally, if you think in those terms, you could see that in some areas, global warming has a much greater impact on a variety of different animal species and on the environment in general. So you could see in the middle, as the temperature rises, and you could see the reasons for the temperature that's going up. You could look on the left below the bear, there is a drought, and then deforestation, and so on and so on. Again, I'm sure you can add more to this picture. This is to just to dramatize my presentation. So here is a picture. Alex spoke about that in the last 50 years, 70% of emerging infectious diseases originated from wildlife, and you could see on that map the various diseases that emerged. Actually, this particular map is not exact. It's not particularly accurate because some of those infections are re-emerging. For instance, TB, which was known for centuries, it disappeared, and with the emergence of HIV/AIDS, it re-emerged in the population. And then there is anthrax, the black dot, which was it was known for many years as a disease of animals as well as occasionally in humans. It was a bioterrorist attack in BC, if you remember. The Lyme disease has been known probably for centuries. It was only discovered in the last 30 years. Cryptosporidiosis, which one of my, this is a topic that I'm best known for, that you would like, if you like to know, this is my contribution to scientific research on this microorganism, which I started some 30 years ago. It's been known since the turn of the century. It was discovered in 1907 by a guy called Tyser from Harvard. And so, you know, it's hardly an emerging disease or re-emerging. We just started to recognize its significance later than usual. But then there is, on the right side, if you look at SARS, that's a new disease that emerged and it's more or less under control right now. The H5N1, the influenza we spoke of, it's an one that emerged. Nipah virus, it's an important bat-mediated or transmitted or virus, which hopefully I get a chance to touch on it a little bit more. Emerged, it didn't really emerge, it just was discovered in the last 10 years, and it presumably was there for a long time beforehand. But there are some that they discovered. If you look at Australia, there is Hendra virus, which appeared in horses out of nowhere. And it got to a situation where veterinarians really refused to treat horses. Luckily enough, about 2 years ago, they developed a vaccine to vaccinate both horses and people to protect them against. So now the veterinarians, they are back on the job. So this is the picture, although it's from 2001, but really it hasn't changed dramatically. You can see the continent that gets the brunt of these infectious agents, Africa. And when you want to think about the three major causes of disease, of transmissible disease, are malaria, TB, and HIV. They all occur in much larger numbers in Africa. And then lesser extent in Southeast Asia, and then so on. As then you can see in US, or the Americas and Europe, it's much less. So here's some profound events in infectious disease in human history. The bubonic plague, the 16th and 17th century in Europe, leading to reforms in sanitation. But really, that's where the term sanitation came from as a consequence of the bubonic, excuse my pronunciation, English was never my strongest point. I come from a long tradition of speaking all sorts of other languages. So smallpox was a major killer of young and the unimmunized, leading to the development of vaccines. So really vaccines owes a great deal of credit to smallpox as a disease. And as a consequence, it was controlled and then it was eradicated. Except it was reintroduced now as a potential biothreat. And again, we're all working frantically to develop countermeasures, and so it's So there are vaccines now against smallpox in case some crazy person decide to, because there are viruses never get, for some reason, which is, I'm not quite sure why, they never got eliminated even when they were declared eradicated. There's always some labs that keep them. And I remember visiting Birmingham in the UK 2 days before there was a case where somebody went to the deep freeze, got some smallpox and started to work with it. And by some sheer accident, 2 people ended up dead, despite of the fact that it was eradicated in the UK 20 years earlier. So scientists have this tendency of, just can't let things go. And the reason I was because I was there 2 days earlier and I was wondering if I was one of the ones who got exposed. Luckily enough, I wasn't. But then there were other hundreds of people who worked in that lab. But it just does cross your mind when you hear about such events. A Group A streptococcal infection in 1840 initiated the chlorinated lime solution in hand washing. So I basically picked issue that led to some sort of remedy that helped us today control some of those diseases. And this is going back to the 16th, 17th century. Then the Spanish flu pandemic of influenza in 1918. You all probably heard about it, the H1N1, which killed something like 18 million people. And therefore it really brought home the concept of globalization, because it wasn't confined to Spain, if you know. It ended up spreading across the globe. And HIV/AIDS appeared in 1981, initiated the worldwide pandemic, and introduced massive antiretroviral therapy. This is a new concept in viral treatment, because treatment really did not exist against viral diseases, because they are considered to be, once they are inside the cell, they infect cells, it can't get inside the cells, it can't kill viruses. But although in some ways HIV/AIDS is not the first virus that they came up with treatment against, because there was one against simplex virus, herpes simplex virus, which works pretty well. But it's just the massive antiretroviral therapy at a global scale was introduced with this particular outbreak. Here are some factors that contribute to emergence or re-emergence of infectious disease, and I think it's worth really paying attention. Microbial evolution. Microbes evolve continuously and constantly, but they do it in a much larger scale that mammals do, because of the generation and because of the number of offsprings that microorganisms produce, the number of cell divisions that they undergo, and also a lot of genetic mishaps and deletions, insertion, and so on in the genomics of microbes, which lead to really a huge potential for selection of more virulent strains or more adapted strains, because you may not know this, but really microorganisms who kill their host are not the most efficient, those that we know of, because microorganisms are better off to live in harmony with their host, because then they could stay there forever. If they kill the host, they have to really go out and then find another one. So microorganisms that really kill their host are not necessarily the smartest. So they have to come up with all kind of additional attributes to help them overcome some of those difficulties, to move from one host to another, to sustain harsh environment. Hence there is the spore formation in some microorganisms. So there's all kind of tools that they found out, or in the case of antimicrobial therapy, which really put a lot of pressure on a lot of bacterial pathogens, they came up with antibiotic resistance. When you think about these microorganisms, they are so much smarter than the rest of us because we've been around, messing around with science for what, 200 years? They've been going through evolutionary improvement, if you like, or adaptation over thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years. And of course, natural disasters, of course, if you remember, there was the issue in Haiti about a couple of years ago, and there was an outbreak of cholera amongst the people who were affected by earthquake. Intrusion into new uninhabited land. That's probably the most important part in terms of microorganisms jumping from wild animals into domestic animals, into humans. When there is an encroachment on an area which was occupied for centuries by wild animals, and they basically have their own population, as we do, of microorganisms. And these microorganisms, when they jump into a new species, they become virulent, and they initiate endemics and then pandemics. Not every microorganism that jump end up this way. Some get adopted, some don't make it anywhere. But you don't really need very many to create a pandemic. And in fact, when you look at history, relatively speaking, pandemics don't occur on a daily basis or a yearly basis. So climatic change, yes, that's also have an impact, because you'll see in another slide, as the temperature warms up, it creates an environment which is much more conducive to amplification of microorganisms in soil, in rotted vegetable, vegetarian, and so on. Vegetation. No, I'll get it right. And then decreased vaccination. As you know, there's some people who don't believe in our society that it is healthy to vaccinate their kids, and they stop vaccinating them for a variety of different reasons, either because they believe that vaccines are detrimental, and I know that there are a fraction of the population that believe that vaccination is a cause of autism, which is, there's no really proof for this. And some don't believe in vaccination because they believe in natural defense mechanism. And so decrease in vaccination is really one of the issues that really we confront here. And all of a sudden, whooping cough reappeared, and diphtheria reappeared in children in the Boston area. So all these because people kind of just basically decide that and they haven't seen it for a while, and they stop immunization. Increased number of immunosuppressed individuals. There are a lot of people now undergoing chemotherapy for either cancer therapy or a variety of different transplantations, and so on and so on. So they are put on immunosuppressive drugs, and they are very, very susceptible individuals, and some infectious agents find them as a suitable host because they're more susceptible, and the immune system cannot fight them in the way that a normal individual can. So the infection there lasts longer. The patient has to be treated with half a dozen different antimicrobial agents, which doesn't help. That means that opens the door for more resistance for antimicrobial agents and so on. I'm looking at you and wondering how many of you really find this okay, and how many of you wish that I would finish. I'm with you there. I'm not saying anything to myself that I didn't know before, so I'm doing it to your benefit, but it's fun though. And I just want you to bear with me for another hour and a half. I'm kidding. And of course I talked about increased antimicrobial resistance due to overdose and also due to overuse in animals, because for some reason antibiotics have been shown to be good growth factors, so they add them to some of the, like swine and dairy, into their diet, and that sort of, again, lead to antimicrobial resistance. Not too far from us, if you want to really look into the future, warmer, longer summers in Massachusetts, the extension of current insect-borne disease further north. So the fact that there's warmer climate around here, so the mosquitoes, the season for the mosquitoes is longer. And because it's getting warmer further north, they're kind of migrating north as well. And this is true in relation to equine, eastern equine encephalitis, which peak in late summer. And of course, West Nile virus already did its thing and started in the East Coast and now all the way down to the West Coast. It's again, it has to do with lengthening of the breeding season of mosquitoes, a longer period for survival and so on. Okay. I'm going to start to move a little bit fast, and maybe I'll skip on some of the things. You're welcome to read them fast, which will be much faster than me reading them for you. So, you know, really some of the factors that contribute to transmission. Hot, humid environment. This is why there are so many more tropical diseases than there are diseases in other much colder climates. Immunodeficiency population, like I mentioned earlier, HIV/AIDS, it really, because they are immunodeficient, a lot of infections that were unknown in humans or were known to be only responsible for acute transient infections have become established, and you can read them down there. And then there is, of course, contaminated water lead to disease, and crowding and poor hygiene. These are the various distribution of infectious agents worldwide, and you can see the top ones are respiratory, then HIV, then diarrhea, and so on, TB and malaria and measles. So here is some of the major causes of preventable disease, and you can read them as I put them down, so we could save time. I've mentioned some of those before, but you could see all these diseases, they are global health issues, they're not transmissible, they're not infectious agents, but nevertheless, they're very, very important. So I'm going to skip through those. Okay, health status is not affected by science alone, and here are some of the factors which I'm sure you're familiar with. Economic and education status, prevention practices or avoidance, I mentioned that before, healthcare delivery system, as you know, it vary in different countries, payments, and so on. So I'm going to now spend the next maybe 5 or 10 minutes to tell you a little bit about our project at Tufts, which is located at the vet school. It's been known for quite some time, and we spoke about emerging infectious diseases from wildlife. So over the years, we were able, the Royal Scientific community, we're able to identify what we call hotspots. That means areas, geographic locations, which diseases tended to emerge from. And they are circled in red in there. Southeast Asia, which is the obvious one I mentioned, avian flu, SARS, and Nipah virus. And there is then Africa. You have 2 centers there. One in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the other one is Uganda, Ethiopia, Kenya, and so on. So USAID decided to issue an award to try to establish centers in those hotspots in order to educate And we're going to do this through interacting with higher education, institutes of higher education in several countries in those hotspots, to be able to share with them some of the knowledge we have, with the hope that they will share it with their students, and it'll be a whole new generation of students and scientists and government workers and faculty, teachers, who would be aware of the kind of diseases that occur in these areas, and they will hopefully develop some sort of vigilance to identify and recognize that something new that show up in that area. So this program, based on this, and this is really just to show you an example of emerging. So this, in this case, is influenza. As you could see, the large number of animals that are involved with influenza. And there are so many different types. What makes influenza unique is the fact that there are so many different types, and they very sort of, there's a term known as genetic drift, which means that viruses share their DNA material, and new combination, or what we call reassortant, emerge that could be either more virulent or less virulent and more adapted to the host. So with influenza, it's very easy, which is the reason why every year there's a new combination or reassortant that emerges, which either antibodies that exist in our system recognize them or not, depending on the extent of the change. And so I'm going to basically go through this. And this is the Hendra virus and Nipah virus that I mentioned. It comes from droppings of fruit bats that they drop on fruit that is eaten by humans, and they contract this very lethal, very dangerous virus. And I spoke about Hendra virus in horses in Australia. And this is just another example of how a disease emerges. This is Ebola in Africa. I'm sure you all heard about it. It came from gorillas, and and so on and so on. So really, what we're talking about, the concept of One Health was coined in the last 10 years, but the use of the term One Health has accelerated over the last 3 or 4 years. And we all talk about One Health, and it means different things to different people. But just to illustrate it for you, it's really when One Health is when, if you don't recognize boundaries between diseases in humans or in animals, or the role of environments. For instance, environment contains other wild animals that can play a major role in transmission. I'll give you an example. Is a disease called leptospirosis, which occurs in humans and in animals. Animals transmit the disease either directly to human or via rats by contaminating environment. So this is the program. I'm just really going to go through and summarize it for you, and then I'll be done. So the name of the program, if you like, is the Emerging Pandemic Threats. Essentially, the idea is to establish a system whereby we could stop. So okay, let me just read through it, because it will come to you much clearer than me trying to kind of accelerate the process. So really the mandate is to strengthen training, educational programs, and support government, universities, and civil society, with the objective to improve worldwide capacity to respond to emerging infectious diseases of zoonotic origin. I couldn't have said it better myself. So there you have it. So the vision, the program called Respond. So a sustainable One Health university networks in Southeast Asia and in Africa that will provide trained leadership, ongoing capacity building, and technical support to governments, in the development and strengthening of transdisciplinary, transboundary approaches to combat emerging infectious diseases, outbreaks, and surveillance in the region. Diseases don't know boundaries, so they just go from one country to another. So that's and the mission is straightforward and obvious from the vision. And so this is where we are at the implementation stage. We have established 2 networks, one in Africa, which is known as the CS, stands for One Health Central and East Africa Network, consisting of 6 countries, Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, DRC, and Tanzania. And there are 14 academic institutions that we interact with. We go there, we share with them our knowledge, and we work with the faculty, with the students, and we have field studies and so on. In Southeast Asia, we did a similar sort of thing. We established the SIAHUN, which stands for Southeast Asia One Health University Network, consisting of 4 countries, which includes Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Thailand. And they too collectively consist of 14 academic institutions. It's quite a handful. We have 28 academic institutions to interact with. So you could imagine us traveling back and forth and doing God's work. So I think this is the last slide. And thank you so much for your attention and for your... Like I said, it's not what I do for a living, because I normally take a slice of what I just gave you and expand on it in a different way. So I just put a lot of stuff in it. Some of it hopefully was of interest to you.
All right, do all the schools know what group number you're in?
Alex, is there any questions?
Oh, are there any questions? Sorry.
There's obviously a lot going on in scientific labs to kind of prevent. Stand up. Okay. Hi, I'm Rose. Is there any? There's obviously a lot of stuff going on in labs to prevent zoonosis and the spread to mammals, but what kind of actions can, say, the general population take? And does it entirely depend on location, the social situation, like urban versus rural, that kind of thing?
It's a tough one. I mean, with biodefense and biothreats, it's unknown. I mean, you could be at risk anywhere and you would know it, and you should know it, and you have no reason to know it. With diseases that, you know, and you know that yourself, when you are sick yourself, you probably, more often than not, you don't go to class because you don't want to put your colleagues and your fellow students at risk. So that's kind of what you could do. And vice versa, some people don't go because they are very sick, but they're so dedicated to their job, they go despite of the fact that they are sick, and they put a lot of people at risk. And that's not very smart. Because, you know, while you want to accomplish what you think that the world can't do without, a half a dozen people get exposed, and then another half a dozen get exposed. The risky part with infectious disease, especially things like cold and temperature and so on, by the time you have it, it's almost too late to stop transmission, because you are more at risk. You're excreting virus or bacteria during the incubation period when you don't know that you are sick. And that's part of the problem. It's kind of, when you think of AIDS, which is, it's an exaggerated way. I mean, it takes 2 to 4 years before you find out that you are sick, and in the meantime you may have infected, I don't know how many partners you may have had, but a whole bunch of them, and you wouldn't know until many years later. At least with cold, within 3 days you're done. So, but it's the same concept. It's just the incubation really works against you. AIDS would have been controlled a long time ago if it was possible to predict that somebody got infected last week, 2 weeks ago. I'm not sure I answered the question, but I did my best.
More questions? Raise your hand, anybody. Okay. Just question over here. Okay, there we go.
Seeing as the world is over its carrying capacity and we're currently in an overshoot of the world population, there's a lot of things trying to go on to prevent a pandemic around the world, but isn't it kind of needed to actually bring the population back down to logistic growth?
The Chinese try to do that. Particularly good job. I really, yeah, I mean, of course, but you know, people from 200 years ago, they were predicting that the population will outgrow the food supply. It hasn't happened yet. So I really don't know how to answer the question because people are living much longer now, I hope. We hope, right?
Yes.
So, you know, this is such a philosophical question. In fact, I had a slide which I took out which showed how the increase in population is going to create a lot of problems. But forget about the food supply, but it is, I mean, crowding, living in enclosed areas, in large, just imagine if there was an outbreak of something that is really serious, it will spread so fast in places of poor hygiene, crowded, with the air pollution, water is not, you know, there are different scenarios that you could imagine that in some places the outcome would be much worse than in others. I mean, the example of China, you know, they really polluted themselves to the extent it's going to take them years to clean it up. I mean, I don't know whether any of you have been to Beijing or Shanghai. You know, you don't see the sun anymore. And it's sad, apart from everything else. You need to get a flight into some place to see the sun. When you go over the haze, it's a kind of a haze, and really it's a terrible place to live. And, you know, I don't know what they're going to do about it, hopefully soon. But also, you know, the pollution also increased asthma. And so I think the population is less of the problem is what the population seems to generate. And unless we control what we're generating, we're going to be in worse trouble than having more people on Earth.
Any other questions? Okay, Nanda.
My name is Ananda. Going off this last question, so basically with the advance in medicine, people get to live longer. I'm wondering if within the medical community there's been the debate as to whether this is really, analyzing the negative effects on humanity as a whole, and I'm wondering if the medical community has debated as to whether there should be whether we should draw a line, or if there should be a line at all, like what should be.
That's not a question to a scientist, you know. Somebody here wants to answer it? I think you make a good point, but I'm not sure, I'm qualified to answer it. And frankly, I'm not even sure I know how to answer it. You know, we got individuals who are going to try to live for as long as they can, and I don't think there's a way that you could draw a line, I think. Anybody wants to take this on?
Let's put it this way. Forget about your physical being. What people are thinking about is immortality, the scientific basis for immortality, which is downloading your consciousness and your intelligence, artificial intelligence. So think about it in those terms. It won't take up a lot of space.
But we, you know, the president just investing $100 million to map the brain. and maybe we can learn something that we don't know today that might be helpful. I don't know.
Look up a man named Dr. Christopher Macedonia, as in the country, who is a lead scientist for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who is one of the leading scientists of DARPA, the Defense Applied Science Institute that brought you the web, and get a sense of where we're going potentially with this project called BRAIN. You've got a wild future ahead of yourselves, because you're not only going to be genetically redesigned, but you've got some real profound privacy and human rights and civil rights questions ahead of you.
So how many of you want to be a scientist after listening to me? Seriously, now, regardless, listening to me is nothing to do with it. But how many of you would aspire to actually be scientists that might take on combating infectious agents, zoonotic diseases? It may be premature, but you know, Africa is going to need a lot of people like you.
I mean, one more question.
Renee, going back to China, do you think there's a point where it's too far, where they cannot even do nothing else? Do you think there's even a chance to just even try, or did they just go too far already of what they did, the overpopulation?
Well, you know, it's something you could do. Again, it's not exactly my field, but look what Los Angeles did, and look what other cities in the United States, when they reached a certain level. A lot of cities now don't allow cars in the inner city of the areas, and you know, and it's sort of, yeah, of course. All they have to do is stop cars from, or at least the bulk of the cars, but there's also a lot of factories in the area, so. You know, you can do something. It's economically expensive. Nobody wants to do it. Politicians as hell don't want to do it. And really, we're all in that. Not necessarily China is sort of it's an extreme, but I'm not sure that we're doing everything we can here in the U.S.
Hi, my name is Daniel. To listen to your presentation, part of the One Health program sees more of a prevention program rather than just reacting to whatever the cause might be. So I'm thinking, is there already a system where they work with small communities to sort of like map out like different pandemics that might occur? Is there like a system at the moment that has track of the like emerging diseases rather than just waiting for it to happen and where it most likely will occur?
You should have been on that. This USAID program I just described to you, in fact, it started with a view to actually educate the community. It was to start at the grassroots, teaching villagers and farmers, because they're the one who really going to be the first to come across a disease or you know, a serious disease in their stock or in the wild before anybody else. But somehow it was thought that it'll be more, it'll be easier to accomplish to start with ministries and with higher education, because it was not possible to go into so many communities. So your idea is really correct, and probably it would be easier to stop it at that level, recognize it and identify it at that level, even if they don't know what it is, and even if it's something that it's known to everybody else, but if they see it for the first time and they let somebody know and it get investigated on the spot rather than waiting for something more serious to happen so they can call experts from the university or the Ministry of Health or agriculture to identify it, but then you probably you lost a bit of valuable time. You make a good point.
I heard that President Carter's center has almost eradicated kindergarten after 30 years of work. Is the way they do that at the local level, is that an example of the grassroots programs you're advocating?
Yeah, I think especially, it's all come down to having the resources to do that, knowing what's in there. And, it's really, there's so many, this is a good example. Okay? But, it could be done at different levels, with different diseases. But it all comes down to resources. Where would you focus? If you have malnourished kids in that area, would you do this before that? I can't answer that really. But it's another way of doing it. Sorry. So, seem to have warmed up with this question.
Great
Then I have a question for you.
Okay.
Would you like to be a high school teacher? You got a responsive audience.
They're just being polite.